just some numbers and some charts that I wanted you guys to see that you may not quite be able to see on the screen. So I just ask for you to be able to get the full experience, to just move up a little bit. I still feel that you guys are very far back. There's plenty of space up front. I do not bite. Just one person. We won't hold you hostage up here. And if we could maybe dim just one light, that will make it a little better. Thank you so much. Wow, only my pathfinders and adventurers are obedient in the house of God. Thank you so much for those of you who are moving just a little closer. So I don't want to spend too much time today. How much time do I have? 45 minutes? 30 minutes? Okay. 30 minutes to cover some mental health and suicide stuff. All right. So this is most certainly just the tip of the iceberg, some of the things that you're going to be seeing today. I actually had a young person speaking to me during lunchtime and asking about specific disorders, etc. And I stated to her, I said, man, no, we would be here for the whole week, just for weeks and weeks doing everything along mental health. And if we got into any specific disorders, that could take much time. So I just really wanted to present to you guys some things to be aware of, especially as many of us are working with young people, with young adults, and mental health is something that is increasingly being seen all over, especially in faith communities. So we want to be able to educate ourselves so that we are knowledgeable, maybe not how to treat, but what to do. So mental health and wellness, and then I'll go into a little bit of suicide stuff. I am looking at the clock now. This one says 6:05, so I will rush through it. And of course, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. So mental health and wellness, some things that we want to keep in mind about mental health is that it includes not just what's going on psychologically, but includes emotional and social well-being. Mental health doesn't only affect what you think, but what you feel and how you act. And this is what kind of helps you cope with all the stressors of life, whether it's school, work. How many of you guys are stressed on your jobs? Anybody? A lot of people, right? We have a lot of stresses coming from us from different places, whether it's home, school, work, maybe the MTA alone is a huge stressor. So we want to be able to have the proper balance all across the board, psychologically, emotionally, socially, to kind of deal with the things that are coming at us. Also, how we relate to others, thereby impacting and affecting the decisions that we make. So positive mental health, what we want to keep in mind is that it helps people to realize their full potential, cope with stresses of life, which we spoke about, to be able to work productively in the environments that they are in, and make meaningful contributions to their communities. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind the cultural variations, right? And the things that different places adhere to as what the normal is. Because something that may be done in the US, we can be seen as mentally ill somewhere else. And some people we judge and we think, man, something's a little off. It's perfectly the norm in the places where they come from. So everything that we're kind of speaking about is sort of in this Western American perspective. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay. So next, Phoebe. No, there's a lot to do. So, yes. So I wanted you guys to especially see this numbers. Yes, please. I'm not sure if you see it here, but 1 in 5 adults in America experience mental illness. 1 in 5. if there are 100 persons in this room, then 20 of us most likely are dealing with or have dealt with mental illness, just to make that a little more real. Nearly 1 in 25 adults live with serious mental illness. And here, 1/2 of all chronic mental illness began by the age of 14 years old. Very interesting to know, especially as we're dealing with pathfinders and young adults. 3/4 by the age of 24 have had the onset of their mental illness. And if you look at specific disorders, you'll see that 1.1 of those individuals have schizophrenia. I always think it's so interesting how mental illness is kind of touched upon and presented in our communities in Western culture. It's usually through movies, it's usually through television, and no one ever really speaks about the person who is mentally ill, who may need some help, whether it's through counseling, whether it is through medicine, etc. But it's always demonized, right? You always see the people who are really experiencing psychosis, or the people who have personality disorders or several personalities. And statistics show you that only about 1.1% of people have schizophrenia. So that leaves more than 98.9% of individuals who are dealing with a variety of other mental illnesses. 2.6 of that is bipolar disorder. So there are many, many more mental illnesses out there, but society kind of, especially, what was the last movie, Split? Was that it? You know, that it's sort of this horror. It's sort of the worst case scenario that we see. And that kind of creates a fear about mental illness for us. We may not see that, but subconsciously, we kind of are afraid of it and are quick to maybe take rash action or quick to ignore because we don't understand. So some consequences to this country with mental illness. 10.2 million adults who have mental illness also are dealing with addiction disorders. 10.2 million in this country. 26%, we did our compassion project this morning, giving out socks to those without a home. 26% of those who are homeless have a mental health disorder. And 24% of state prisoners have had a recent mental health condition. Now, the pastor this morning, Pastor Carol, kind of touched on it just a little bit, and I was like, yes! But sometimes, or let me not say sometimes, all the time in the U.S., it's sort of a cradle to prison system, or people speak about, or people don't usually speak about the other things that are at play with mental illness. With these kind of statistics, you think to yourself, why aren't there more mental health clinics? But yet prisons are packed. Why aren't there more homeless shelters? People are literally, my sister works with the city. People are literally protesting homeless shelters being built in their homes or in their area, excuse me. And no one really wants to broach and provide the help at what the real cause is, but instead it's become more of a money-making business. Right? And there's also, if you want to take it there, I see you. There's also a lot that can be said with how mental illness is viewed through colorism and racism. Because on your television screen, those of our white brothers and sisters often are pinned and recognized as having mental illness. But those in the minority are terrorists and/or psychopaths, just vagabonds, etc., when they can also be dealing with mental illness. But there's not much placed on that. You had a question? Right. No, often there can be a correlation. The brother asks, is it the situations that they're dealing with that can trigger the onset of mental health illnesses? Some may, however, these statistics were taking for those who had recently on file mental health conditions already, kind of before being thrown into these situations. Okay, great question. So the impact of that for us taxpayers, yay, April 15th is coming. Do your taxes, folks. Um, oh, thank you, Damien, 17th. We are, as a nation, 193 billion in lost earnings every year spent on mental health issues. Okay? And we're going to speak about suicide a little later, but be aware that 90% of those who die by suicide have an underlying mental illness. And I won't get into it too much, but a lot of that is changing the approach of faith communities, especially because years ago, if people talked about suicide, it was like, no way, you committed this violent act, etc. But now people are beginning to understand that there are underlying issues to that. So some things to consider, some diverse things to consider about mental health and mental health treatment in our communities. There are definitely higher levels of stigma, poorer quality of care for those who are our skin color in many different neighborhoods, culturally insensitive healthcare system. People don't understand or just are not culturally open to approaching mental health through other cultures. Language barriers exist. And racism, bias, homophobia, and discrimination are rampant in treatment settings. And if you guys just cross out this word, critical issues faced by multicultural communities, and put faith communities or Adventist communities, it will be the same thing. Because there is a lot of stigma around mental health. We are very culturally insensitive because, people are just called crazy and just, possessed. They have demons, etc. Language barriers, of course, exist. And most certainly, maybe not racism and bias as much within our own faith communities, but most certainly homophobia and discrimination. The use of mental health services among adults. We'll go straight to Black. 6.6% of Black males are accessing mental health services. 10.3% of Black women are accessing that. That is nothing, nothing, nothing. Our Hispanic population, even less men, 5.5% are accessing health services. And even less women, 9.2%. As opposed to our white counterparts who are not, so much better, but still better than our numbers. Women accessing 11.3% and men accessing 11.3% and women accessing 21.5%. So if our people are not accessing mental health and or we are not behind the scenes providing mental health services and speaking about it, there's going to continue to be a disparity in the way that we receive services. And I wanted to point out, yes, I am aware we are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but to pretend our young people and or adult people are not dealing with homosexuality, we're fooling ourselves. So 2 to 3 times young persons are more likely to attempt suicide than straight youth. So sometimes we see issues of suicide in our congregations, in our communities, in our families, etc., but we are not really targeting what the underlying issue may be. Okay? 1 in 5 children, 13 to 18, have a serious mental illness. And these are just some warning signs. Again, the tip of the iceberg. Severe mood swings that cause problems in relationships. Again, very taboo, because I know no Caribbean parent that's going to allow severe mood swings in their house and not go grab their belt, their switch, whatever it's going to be. Their backhand, their spoon from the kitchen, whatever it's going to be. And sometimes we think the children are just being so disrespectful, but we're not maybe realizing that there may be an underlying issue, and maybe if the behavior is not changing with some of our approaches, that there needs to be something else done or looked into, right? Intense worries or fears. This is something that I am seeing kind of along with the overwhelming fear and reason. Anxiety and panic attacks are on the rise. On the rise. I just did a training for some guidance counselors earlier in the week, and the guidance counselors were inundated with kids that were kind of coming into their office and just worried about the exams that they had to take, worried about home life. A lot of kids are worried about immigration policy because their parents are undocumented. So there's just seems to be a high onset on anxiety and panic attacks. And people don't really understand these disorders because they're thinking, just pray. You'll be all right. Like, there's no issue. You have not enough faith. You don't have enough faith. And people don't understand that these are things that are somatically linked to your body. You can't kind of just shut it off and just feel calm. Think on Jesus and just feel calm. There are processes and certain imbalances sometimes in the mind that's leading to these manifestations in the body, the higher heart rate, the sweaty palms, the sweating, etc. So these are things that we need to get our kids and our young adults analyzed for. Or you yourself need to be analyzed for with some professionals. Extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still. That can lead failure to schools. Again, coming from a Caribbean background, we know how we handle that. You're dumb, we didn't send you to school for anything, we throw every word at them in the book, and we're not understanding that there may be some underlying issues that have to do with concentration. It reminds me of when I was in the 5th grade, when my eyes started to go bad, and I couldn't see. If my parents had just said, this is foolish. Why are you not listening, or why are you not able to do your work? And they didn't say, something may be wrong. And the teachers didn't get together and say something may be wrong with your eyesight. They would have maybe just thought that I had a problem concentrating, or I didn't want to listen, or I didn't want to do the work. Same thing with mental illness. We have to do our part and be aware of certain signs so that we can access the help for our children, our teens, and for ourselves. No, it's good. So something I wanted to talk about just a little. Oh, back, Phoebe, de-escalation. Okay. One more back. Okay, so something I wanted to speak about, especially in our communities, and I love doing these presentations because it forces me to do the work, right? So I was speaking to a lot of social workers, mental health counselors, etc. We kind of speaking together about how do you de-escalate a situation with an individual who may be mentally ill right here in your church. We can all agree that that's an important thing to know, right? Well, firstly, I find that we really have a lack of preparation in our Seventh-day Adventist churches. How many churches have nurse on duty? Right? Many churches have a nurse on duty. But it's kind of with the intention that a lot of the issues that you will be facing are Yes, Joy is saying headache, Tylenol, migraine are kind of physiological issues, right? If someone faints, the nurse is ready to go. If you have a headache, got this for you, right? If you're feeling just tight here, let me check your blood pressure. You're feeling low, here's a candy for your diabetes, whatever it may be. But many of us are not prepared and have someone on the team, and our churches don't know what to do if someone is mentally ill and begins to manifest some of the symptoms of their illness. And I want to point out that I keep on saying illness because that's what it is. Just like someone would be cut and you utilize a Band-Aid, mental illness is just that, okay? It is not the person. You are not bipolar. And sometimes we have a tendency to do that. Oh, that bipolar kid? No, that is Damien who suffers from bipolar disorder. Okay? We have to be very clear. We have to be very clear with that, okay? Because sometimes we like to call people their symptoms. And that is not correct. That continues the atmosphere of stigma and making people feel that they are not individuals. And it's not good hospitality. It doesn't make anyone feel welcome. We don't go around saying that guy with cancer. We don't. Or that person with diabetes, high blood pressure. So we don't use mental illness as an identifier when speaking about individuals. So nurses are not ready to broach the topic of mental illness. So I'll turn to you guys. The slides are kind of up there. Take it away, Phoebe, quickly for me. What would you guys do? I hope you didn't read it. What would you guys do if someone was manifesting symptoms of their mental illness in the church right now? We're having this presentation right now. What would you all do? Any ideas? You read that. Stop. Call 911. Okay. Run and hide. The sister is truthful. The sister is truthful. What movie was that from? Run and hide. I forget. Anybody else? Any ideas? Call upon the elders. That's very common. Pray. Okay, my sister in the back, thank you so much, says you had to make sure that they're calm. So one thing that I included up there, it's the slide before. Before we get into all that, I want to let you guys know that if someone manifests their symptoms, our intent, our number one intent, as it's showing up here but not there. Maybe we can fix that in the back, Ricky. I'm seeing something here and not there. Not the right slide. Go back, Phoebe. Yes, thank you. Our number one intent, and I wanted to make sure that it was there, was to have, in any approach that you take, think in your back of your mind, the whole point of this, whatever we do, we want that individual to feel that they can be integrated back into the faith community. Okay? That is being our brothers and sisters' keeper, okay? And I hope that we really understand the importance of that before kind of grabbing someone or pushing them out, because we have a lot of visitors coming to our church, right, who we may not have seen before. But pushing them out and taking on these physical actions, we need to understand that these are persons who can possibly be integrated into our faith community. And these are persons who are part of our faith community that we don't want to leave because of their bad experience here. I don't think that anyone who, let's say, your sugar levels went low and who kind of fell to the floor would be so overly embarrassed that they wouldn't come back the next Sabbath. Because there's no stigma with that, right? Your sugar levels were low, etc. But if someone did manifest symptoms of whatever disorder they have, we have to be mindful that we broach the topic as best as we can, respectfully, right? So that that person does feel comfortable coming the next Sabbath and being like, this is the illness that I'm dealing with, and feel welcome here, and feel welcome here. So most certainly, clear the room, creating a safe and secure space. Many of us, I see you, sister, many of us, it's just all, us black people all together. Something goes down on that side of the room, we want to go see. Or we want to have a part, we want to lean in, we want to do this. That's why I say you should have those who are mental health professionals on duty for that Sabbath and ready to sort of deal with the crises while everyone else leaves the room. And that's actually the same thing that should be done if it was a physical problem. You know, someone has just fainted, they don't need 100 people kind of over them looking down, some, you know, etc., fanning, doing whatever. You want to pray? Absolutely. Outside in the floor. Everyone leave except for those who are needed specifically for the crisis, okay? Of course, assess if there's an object that can be utilized to harm themselves or to harm you. If there is an object that can be used to harm themselves or you, of course you want to make sure to stay back. Well, let's say it's a knife, you can stay back. If it's a gun, then yes, please, like Joyce says, call the authorities. What was that? If it's a gun, yes, call. No. If it's a gun, please call the authorities. Now, I know that, and rightfully so, we have been thrown off with what the media presents as the story's gone wrong, as officers who do not handle these situations appropriately. But officers do have training on how to approach the mentally ill as well. So if it is a gun, yes. If it is a gun, we didn't need the EMT individual getting shot either. Okay? Now, okay, everyone with me? Okay. Now, if there is no object to possibly cause harm to self or to cause harm to you, then the individuals who should be approaching that person are firstly, logically, the person who has the best rapport with them. Okay? As much as we love throwing out elders to the lion's den, and I know our churches love to do that. Someone walks through the door who's funny, who do you need to speak to? And you just beeline, you go get your elder or your pastor or the deacon. You don't want to deal with it. But the person who approaches should be the one who has the best rapport. Okay? Not only just a friend. What if your friend is 16? Not just the person who has the best rapport, but they should also approach with a professional. That's why it's important to have those who are able to handle mental health crises available and on duty. So that is your church social workers. That is your church nurses who may have a history of assessing mental health disorder. That's your licensed mental health therapist. That's your psychologist, your psychiatrist in the church, etc. They should approach because your intent is to get the person calm. And while the individual who has the most rapport can work in doing that, the professional should be assessing a few things. And only a professional, because they have been doing this hopefully for a while, would be able automatically, like driving, to see what they need to see. Because you're later on going to have to give a report of what was going on. So you need to be able to see what's going on with the person's perhaps gait. Gait is their walk, their movements. You need to be able to see what's going on with their speech. You need to be able to analyze perhaps what has been going on with their dress, etc. It all matters. And of course, what the person is saying, giving you insight to what they're thinking. whether they are using repetitive language, whether they are dwelling on a specific issue, whether they're experiencing constriction and kind of like only seeing through a tunnel and only seeing one thing. The professional will help to be able to analyze all of those things. And before I continue, you had a question, sister? This is a great time for that. When you remember. Okay. Right. And I most certainly agree. This isn't about someone dealing with mental health issues that don't require overt, thank you for clearing that don't require overt manifestations. I'm speaking about something that may specifically perhaps disturb the service or be harmful to themselves or to others, those situations. And thank you for helping me clarify that. I'm not speaking about a person perhaps quietly and you notice something with their dress or with their behavior or with their speech that's perhaps not the best, and you're thinking to yourself, this may be a sign of mental illness, something is going on in their life, and then you go tell everybody, clear the room. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm talking about more of those overt situations, and thank you for helping to clarify that, because we want to make the difference. And remember, it's preferable to accompany the individual to the psychiatric ER. Okay? That's one of the better routes to take. I see your hand. That's one of the better routes to take. Because when officers do come, they usually do, and most likely will, cuff individuals. Okay? Because that is one of the ways they know how to restrain persons from acting out in manners that they may not be too okay with. So we don't want it to get that far, especially if they do not have a harmful object. So it's important to know where our psychiatric ERs are. Most hospitals do have social workers, psychologists, etc., working the shifts to be able to do a proper evaluation and assess what is going on. Sure.
What did you mean by speech when you say that speech could be a sign of mental illness?
Okay. Thank you for asking. She asked, what do I mean by speech? That speech can be a sign of mental illness. And let me try not to use, I'm not going to say ruminating because you might know what I mean. She's like, no, I don't know what that means. I'm speaking about circular thinking. Gosh, that's too hard to. I'm somebody repeating over and over the same thing or the same kind of story. You may hear a person saying, okay, the dog is blue, the dog is blue, the dog is blue, the dog is blue, and they're not speaking to anyone. Or they may be speaking to someone and the subject matter is on one thing. Or even when someone is speaking to you and you're noticing that they're speaking in another realm, it's a fantasy world where they're speaking to you and they're like, did you see that pink unicorn? It's great. They're not, then their speech, what they're saying is not based on what is actually present and what is actually the norm of the society. So things like that, okay? Go ahead, Fifi.
Could speech, not I wouldn't say issues, but speech like red flags to look out for? Would that could someone who's having trouble, like I am, having trouble articulating, and maybe like speaking like a mile a minute, so to speak.
Yeah, it can be. But it's important to see what else is happening as well. Because someone really just may be a fast talker, or they may have a stutter. It doesn't mean that there's a mental illness or they're trying to formulate their thoughts. That's why it's important to analyze the spectrum of several things at once, including behavior, including dress, including what they're thinking and what they're saying, to be able to see if there's an issue there, or even what they're expressing is going on with their body. Okay.
I'm really curious to know if we can contribute to somebody's breakdown. So let's say, I have a friend who suffers with mental illness, and she got up Sabbath morning and she's all right, but she came to church, and maybe could we help trigger that in an individual? Could we add to someone's, I don't know.
To their symptoms? Well, I don't want anyone thinking that that they are adding to something. Of course, the environment does play a role. I'll use the example of someone who may be suffering from PTSD. The environment plays a large role in many of their symptoms. So someone may be sitting here completely fine, and they came in here and they were doing church service as normal, and maybe they don't really know about Adventism or whatever it may be, and then someone says, company halt, drum corps, boom, and they hear that sound and they weren't expecting it. That may trigger them and remind them of maybe a war experience that they had, or linked to another traumatic experience. So that's how the environment can kind of contribute to that. But sometimes it's not necessarily the things that we think. Like conversation, we're talking about this normally, and then you automatically feel the symptoms. Post-traumatic stress disorder. So basically individuals, I use the war experience, but individuals who have had a traumatic experience and whom are still suffering symptoms because of that experience. And it can be a far and wide in between. Often we think about war, but rape cases, people may result in PTSD, domestic violence cases, robbery, anything traumatic, being a refugee, etc., dealing with a situation like that where you had to immigrate from one place to another quickly, rapidly. Individuals may suffer from trauma.
If an individual has been diagnosed suffering from autism, which is paranormal behavior, how could the person who is in charge of that particular individual, I know that we need to seek help, but where can we seek help for a person who has been diagnosed with autism?
Thank you for your question. Can you please clarify what you mean by paranormal?
That's what is diagnosed. It's said paranoia.
Oh, paranoia. Okay, thank you so much. Yes. Well, autism is most certainly on the rise with research. And I know that our school systems, at least a lot of them, are working and aiding parents, individual education plans. Many of them have IEPs. There are occupational therapists in the school, therapists, psychologists in the schools who can really help and inform parents with those situations. In addition to several clinics that are specifically there for the autistic population. Again, a lot of stigma around autism, the scale of it. Because something like Asperger's disease, which is the other end of the spectrum, who individuals are not mute, who speak, who often are quite intelligent, they may have some social issues that people are not kind of aware of. But again, education is really the key, and seeking out the aid of professionals and helping with those specific things. Okay? I'll take one more question because I want to most certainly get to the suicide part.
Well, God forbid, like in school, the same situation happened. What are we supposed to do?
You mean the same situation like Parkland in Florida? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, what are we talking about now? Yeah.
A mental health situation in your school?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I just want to point out that that's a lot of questions that kids have now. A lot more children, because of what they're seeing on the television, are developing anxiety from going to school because it's no longer seen as a safe place. So one of the things that we hope schools are doing, but not enough of them are doing, is really running, the word is slipping my mind, but being prepared for these situations, just like they would for a fire drill. And now increasingly, because of what we're facing with the active shooting, I don't know about your work, we have active shooter drills now, and active shooter drills in the schools they're most certainly having. Exactly, sheltering and lockdown. So oftentimes that's the first thing that the school systems will do to keep the children safe and the educators safe: shelter in place. Especially if it's not an act of nature where, like an earthquake, they have to go under the desk, but they lock down the doors and lock down the school until they can get things like authorities, the mobile health crisis, people who are trained to be able to go in and speak to those individuals.
There are also crisis teams set up. So if you have a student that's like chairs and really out of control, you get the guidance counselor, you call the crisis personnel. You can call security, which I know at the tip 1,000.
Yes.
And you get them all coming to your room.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
It's safe and
And especially if it's in your classroom. Thank you so much. So, suicide. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. And among all the ways to die, you see that number is not high when you think about it. For every suicide, I always love that statistic. For every person who has completed suicide, there were 25 attempts made. So you have to be aware that suicide completion are just those who have actually died as a result of this. It by no way kind of quantifies how many people have tried to take their life. Suicide, if you're interested in finances, costs the U.S. $44 billion annually. I wanted to put on some statistics that were actually based on nationally and in New York. So more people, so you can kind of get this in your mind, die from suicide than automobile accidents. Twice as many people die from suicide as people who have killed one another from homicide. Twice as many, and this is nationally. Men die by suicide 3.5 times more than women. But later on, I want you to remember that. That men die 3.5 times more than women. And I'll tell you why you have to remember that later. And if you're interested to know who has the highest suicide rate, it is middle-aged white men in particular. Now, it's so interesting that in the academic community, recognize and will say, I've met several of them who will say, when you ask them, Well, why is it so high among our white counterparts as opposed to other groups? And they will, straight to your face, believe in God or not, will say those minorities have strong faith communities. So that is a plus. And even if it's not faith communities, value community in general. Value coming together in order to aid ones with issues, as opposed to a more Western wide kind of just society where people value more individuality. Damien?
Yeah.
Question, yes, thank you.
In terms of the in the white section, and I can attest to this because I'm in the construction field, and it is basically peer pressure from their spouses, because most of these individuals, they find themselves have to meet up with the Joneses, and because of the individuals who they marry, and because of the level that they had been living with their parents, these individuals find themselves now become inadequate because they have to meet up to that standard. And if they don't, then they find themselves, hard to find themselves can't contribute. Because if we look at it, most of the white folks have to take their children to Disneyland, to the welfare or whatever. We, as you mentioned, blacks, we can be comfortable in taking our children, go out in the yard and play. So we don't have that kind of peer pressure. So this is one of the things that when these guys go about and they can't satisfy the domestic issue, then they become disgruntled and they commit suicide.
Well, thank you for your comment. Most certainly a contributor to individuals feeling hopeless and can perhaps end with suicide, most certainly is sort of the pressures that they receive in the environments around them. Now, whether that's spouse, whether that's work pressure, whatever other stressor that may be on your life, those are often contributors to that. Statistics taken here, and I wanted to include this because we were talking about, of course, suicide, how it impacts young persons, but the charts usually don't lie. The highest rates of suicide are among adults 45 to 64. So please, before you think to yourself, you need to help the pathfinders and venturers and young adults be educated, many of us who are older persons, need to look at our peers and really analyze and see what pressures and stressors and what is happening in their life that they are dealing with. Most certainly, suicide is on the rise with adolescents, but it's still not the highest age range rates.
It costs the government $44 billion
Right.
for the year. How is that? Because I'm thinking that if an individual is going to commit suicide, that is between them and the family. So how
that's a great question. Those numbers are based on what the government has to do in cases of attempts. For example, you have attempted suicide and you have the ambulance called. That is, they're thinking about it that way. Those are services in the community. Perhaps you got taken to the hospital and now you need a hospital stay. You need treatment. The pay that is contributed to those nurses to take care of you, the medication that is needed, the psychologist that has to now go in and evaluate. That's how they're seeing it and saying that these are contributing factors financially. Unfortunately, a lot of that is not prevention, but postvention. So it's a big thing where in mental health, we are looking towards education, towards forums like this, where people can be educated so that the problem can kind of be stopped or stalled, whatever it may be, before we get to, okay, there was an attempt, what do we do now? Okay. Okay, one more question, because my...
So seeing from the chart, there aren't many suicidal deaths for that have happened from children, but even in that small amount from 2000 to 2015, could some of the causes be from bullying?
Well, it's such a good question. I like this girl. Can I take her to my church? This is, of course, usually when the census is done, that's when we get a lot of our information. That's why these things were from, often you find more information from the previous census that's done in the US. But it's a great question you asked about bullying, because that is one of the contributors that individuals are finding more and more that is contributing to younger children and adolescents suiciding. Okay? And you guys can most certainly understand why. I always tell people, when we were growing up, there was a fight, there was a stress at school. At 3 o'clock, you left it behind. You left it in that building, you left it on that playground, you went home. Now, the kids cannot escape this. It is so difficult with phones, with the internet, with the computers. Sometimes the bullying does not stop. And it is contributing all across the border to adolescent health, because these kids are not sleeping, parents. And the kids always hate me when I say this, but if I was a parent, no child would have their cell phone will be checked in with me before I turned off my lights and went to bed. Yes. Because you think your children are sleeping. No, they are up, they are scrolling. This one said this one said that. They can't escape it. These ones don't like me. And before they even step foot into the schoolroom, everything has happened overnight. I'm sure a bully doesn't even have to come up to you and say, we're going to fight. They just text you 3 o'clock after school. Meet me at the lunchroom, whatever it is. So they really can't escape this. Yes, my brother.
This young lady, she actually was given a number of CDs that was teaching her how to commit suicide. And I happened to listen to one, and when I realized that's what it was, I found out where she got it from some of her own schoolmates. And so I actually didn't want to give them back to us, so I break them up. Well, and then she came back and she told me that her friends said to bring her CDs back. And I told her to tell her friends to come and see me. And I haven't heard anything else from it. But I'm just saying this to show that sometimes this is taught, but right there in the school by some of the other brethren, school members.
Yeah. I again encourage parents to know what's what with what teens and adolescents are doing. One of the things that's kind of popping is 13 Reasons Why. If those of you who do not know what that is a Netflix, it was a book, and that is now a Netflix series where the young lady suicided, but the episodes are based on her narrative and her voice and speaking to individuals that she wrote letters to, and they're speaking to them about how they contributed to her suicide. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because things like this bring the topic matter. I haven't had it's no longer trying to pull out of my adolescence, do you have suicidal ideations, you this and this, because now that these things are available and it's easier to talk about, they come forward more with what's going on with them. But negative in the way that the graphics, in the way that it displays certain things. It's mind-boggling to kind of see the cinematography and to see how people can, in essence, get some ideas and how it can sort of idealize this thing. I always tell my young people, worst case scenario, this was to happen, there is no you talking in the background with a voice letting people know what the issue was after you have suicide. You know, it's kind of creating this idea that you can speak and let your thoughts be known after you have died. And we know that that's not the case.
What coping mechanisms have you seen the Adventist faith provided to not just young people? Because based on your statistics, it's 45 and up. But what coping mechanisms have you seen being offered within the Christian community? I know that I've heard that going out into nature may help, but what have you seen in your profession?
Not many. And then those that may be done, not very well. Our faith community, rightfully so, depends a lot on prayer. However, with prayer has to come action. We have to, first of all, I don't think if anyone is dealing with a disorder here that they should go to the social worker in their church or to the mental health therapist in their church. That's a conflict of interest. And anyone who's a professional will know that. You know, the person may reveal certain things that they may not necessarily want you to know, thereby impacting their environment and kind of making them step away from it. But I do think that we need to do a better job of even knowing how to access help. I tell people a lot, there's no reason that we should be so passive in the way that we can't even do a simple Google search, where we can help individuals find mental health clinics or take a day off and perhaps accompany them to these places. And many of them are not faith-based, so that's why I love when I meet professionals within our churches, because there is just naturally a different approach to the work that you do, because you have another just aspect and a Bible-believing foundation, where you can help individuals in a way that may not necessarily involve, I'll use an easy example. Not many people do it, but a psychiatrist may be very quick to give you drugs and do this. But someone who's faith-based may say, hey, this may or may not be necessary. Here are some other options as well.
The Northeastern Conference started a mental health committee. It's a list of professionals who are mental health professionals. They're collecting information, and anybody who wants to be a part of it, so that they can help not just destigmatize what mental health is within our churches, but also help you to find connections and professional help within our churches.
Amen. Thank you for that. And I know that's something that I've talked to our youth director about that, of having just a network where we can reach out to other persons or refer out to those whom we know have a faith basis. So I'm going to quickly move ahead because there's a few more things. Wow, 5 more minutes. Okay. Skip that. Whew. So there's no complete count of how many suicides there are, because as I said, if for every suicide completed there are 25 attempts, that means more than likely there are 25 individuals who did not complete suicide, who did not seek out help, who did not get into our hospital systems so that they can record that this was an attempted death. Okay? I told you guys to keep in mind that men 3.5 are 3.5 times more likely to complete suicide, but females attempt suicide 3 times more often than males. 3 times more often. And that's usually because of the methods that males utilize. They are more likely to complete suicide because they utilize often firearms. Where women do not do so, they turn to things like pills and like medication and drugs. And some of those things are 50-50. Sometimes you do not die. More often than not, you may not die. New York State, on average, one person dies by suicide every 5 hours. So from the time we arrived for Sabbath school to now, you can do the math. I wanted to draw your attention to this. This is basically everyone in Pathfinder and young adults. Our Pathfinders' fourth leading cause of death is suicide. Pathfinders into early adolescence, third leading cause of death. Our young adults, suicide, second leading cause of death. So this is a real issue. I'm just going to quickly go over some myths that we have to keep in mind. When someone is suicidal, they will always remain suicidal. That is not true. The thoughts and the ideations and ruminating on wanting to cause harm to yourself may not always remain. They may be based on medication. They may be based on the life stressor that's happening at that time. You will not always be suicidal. Myth number 2, talking about suicide is encouragement. And that is most certainly not the case. It does not encourage suicidal behavior, but instead can offer people the opportunity to rethink that possible self-harm. So we want to have forums like this where people are informed about the consequences so that we can aid them with perhaps this line of thinking. Thirdly, someone who is suicidal is determined to die. I know, you're like, what? Not the case. Not the case. Some people who are thinking about suicide are kind of indifferent. It's an option. And they are stuck on that option because they may not have been presented with other ways out of their situation. So you want to be able to present different ways and to help them with maybe what the underlying issue is to provide help. Myth 4, people who talk about suicide do not mean to do it. And I've actually, you meet people like that, who say, oh my gosh, you always talk about you want to kill yourself, whatever, and you've never done it. We need to be careful and move away from that language. As many as 75% of individuals who attempt suicide, they do something or say something to let us know how they will act. Okay? I apologize. Remember the question. Just trying to get through some of these things. Now, we'll skip that. Some warning signs to think about. I'll show you some. If a person is talking about being a burden to others, feeling trapped, experiencing unbearable pain, having no reason to live, and of course, killing themselves, they have a plan, they have a date, they're speaking to people about what they're going to leave behind. That is something to be aware of, to keep track of, and it's okay to straight up. Sometimes people straight up, the professor say, are you thinking about killing yourself? It's okay to ask that. You know, some of us think, oh my gosh, that's gonna make them want to do it. But you can cut to the chase and ask that, and then take proper measures to get that individual help. Specific things to look for: increased use of drugs and alcohol. They're actually looking for materials or something to end their life. They're acting restlessly, withdrawing from activities that they took joy in, isolating themselves from friends and family, sleeping too much or too little, they're visiting or they're calling people, and you feel like it's those conversations where they're calling to kind of say bye, to wrap up relationships, situations. They're giving away prized possessions, and sometimes aggression. Some signs of suicide that have to do with mood, depression, loss of interest, rage, irritability, humiliation, anxiety. And specifically for our teens, some things to be aware of: the change in eating and sleeping, withdrawal from friends and family and their regular habits, rebellious behavior, persistent boredom, difficulty concentrating, not tolerating praise or rewards. Like when you tell someone, "Oh man, that was a good job." "Oh no, that was terrible." These are some of the warning signs. We'll skip that. So risk factors are just things that may increase an individual's tendency to suicide. So some things to think about. We talked about how 90% of individuals who suicide have an underlying mental health disorder. So some of those things are here. Substance abuse disorders as well, and chronic health conditions. And we won't even get to assisted suicide, which is a large factor in the medical field right now. Environmental, the stressful life events, prolonged stress, the access to lethal firearms, and exposure to another person's suicide is most likely a risk factor for individuals to suicide. Okay, so it clusters. And it's a variety of life stressors. It can be recession, financial stresses. It can be divorce. It can be failure academically. There are so many different stressors. Previous suicide attempts, a family history of suicide, and social isolation are also risk factors, some social factors. Helping a suicidal person, and I'll end off with these few slides because sometimes we wonder what to do. Get professional help. Be willing to do everything in your power to assist that individual. You can call a crisis line for advice and referrals. And I have some of those numbers at the end of the slide that I would love for everyone to kind of pull out their phones and put into there. You think you may not need it until you do. Okay? You want to be proactive. Saying, call me if you need anything is not the right thing to do. Way too passive. You want to be a bit more, not completely aggressive, but a bit more aggressive in just checking on that person. And if you have a rapport with them, maybe dropping by, spending some time with them. You don't want to be waiting on them to call you. That call may never come. And of course, you can encourage positive lifestyles, things, exercise, sleep, diet, so that they can incorporate into their lives to sort of maybe relieve some of those other stressors. And logically, remove any means of suicide. I have had some parents are perhaps aware that their children have had suicidal ideations, but then there's no lock on their medicine cabinet. Or especially down south, there's no lock on your gun cabinet. The right to bear arms and things are just lying around. You want to make sure that there are potentially no harmful objects, pills, knives, razors, firearms around. And you want to, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You want to be able to check on someone for the long haul and provide them with your support for the long haul, periodically dropping in and checking in on them. Skip those Bible verses, but suicide is in the Bible, folks. So these are the numbers that I want you to keep in mind. This is 24/7 help. 24/7 help for those of you. Take pictures, write the numbers down, whatever it may be. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, you can call them. They have professionals. The Samaritan Suicide Prevention Hotline is specifically based often in New York. They have chapters. And for those of you who would rather text, for the young people who would rather text, you don't want to call anybody. Maybe you don't want to hear anybody's voice. You can text 741-74, text 741-741, and if you type in listen, a trained professional will begin to correspond with you. Okay? Be right there. Now, the new for maybe other mental health issues, New York City Well Confidential Helpline. The number is also there. This is specifically for New York City. And for those of you who like to text, you can text well to 65173, and a professional will begin to correspond with you. And this is the only one from NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness Helpline. This is the only one that is not 24/7, Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And you can call them for aid with a mental health issue. Okay. Shay in the room? Okay. I'll take your questions. Yes.
Yes, we look at the end result, but what about the root problem? I remember there was a lady who she was about 5 years old when she was first raped by her uncle, her aunt, husband, right where her grandma. Her mom was a drug person, so she left her with her mother.
Right.
And the mother have a daughter and a husband living there. And that was the first time it happened, and she was threatened. And she told me the whole detail of that. And when she was 11, her mother found out and moved her from there to another relative house. And it happens again when she was about 11 years old. She came to the city and she started to work. She became a Christian, and she was in the choir group. And she met someone in the church, and they were dating for a while to get married. And one night while he was walking her home, he wanted to get, he asked her why she never invited him in. And she said, they're not married and she's not going to invite him in her house until then. And he said, not even for coffee. So she said, all right, just this once. And he tried to rape her, and everything from then came right back. And that's when she said she wasn't good for anything, and she don't see why she need to be alive, and she wanted to commit suicide.
Right.
And then there was an Adventist young man who was married, and after he got married, he had his first child. The lady left him, and he was one of the praise singer also, and he just went blank. He didn't want to talk to anybody for a while, and nobody could get him to talk, and he was on the verge of committing suicide also.
Well, rightfully so. I think we can understand how certain traumas in life and certain situations that seemingly are where hopelessness kind of dwells, that suicide can be or is thought of as an option. But most certainly that individual would need professional help. And that's the best thing that we can do to get them speaking to someone who is trained in trauma, speaking to someone who is trained in mental health and what they're going through and the symptoms, to be able to dive in and broach some of those topics with them. So most certainly a professional. My young lady here had a question.
How do you stay away from mental illness, or better yet, suicide?
How do you stay away from it? Well, that question is a little complicated because you may not be able to stay away from it. The same way that individuals can be born with sickle cell anemia or some other kind of genetic disease is the same way that some can be born and they will have an onset that may maybe not be seen earlier in their life, but later. That's why we want to destigmatize these things, and it is an illness. What you want to do is make sure that you support individuals in a way in which they can get the help that they need and be educated in what their disorder is. Okay? I am getting like blinks here. It's time to end. Thank you so much for staying, both New Haven family and everyone else who has joined us. And Joy will end off.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rashida. We appreciate your advice, your statistics, and your help. Amen? Okay, so now it's Vespers time. I'll try to keep it short because I know we want to go home. Okay, our Vespers text is taken from Proverbs chapter 15, Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. We already could grasp what this text is telling us. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine. We know that medicine is like a remedy and a cure. And when you ever heard someone say, "Oh, you made my day, you brightened my day," and sometimes you didn't physically do anything for them, but all you did was smile and then encourage them with your words. But a broken spirit, someone who's discouraged, someone who's beaten, someone who's hurt, their bones, a broken spirit drieth up the bones. You know that some people could be physically healthy, but just because they're hurt or they're broken by some internal problem or something they're going through with their family, it could cause them to physically get sick. Right? That kind of relates to the mental health thing we was just going over. So I want us to go through this week thinking on things like in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. We know that text. Finally, my brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. So remember this verse again in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 2. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth up the bones. Amen? So now we will sing hymn 56, and you could stand up as we close.
The day thou gavest, Lord, is ended. The darkness folds at thy behest. To thee are morning hymns ascended. Thy praise shall hallow now or rest. We thank thee that thy church unsleeping, while earth rolls onward into light, through all the world a watch is keeping, and rest not now by day or night. So be it, Lord, thy throne shall never, like earth's proud emperors, pass away. Thy kingdom stands and grows forever, till all thy creatures own thy sway.
Heavenly Father, we just want to say thank you for today. We want to thank you for being in your sanctuary. We want to thank you for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us. We want to thank you for our Brooklyn area youth who presented the program today. Thank you for being with them in their ministry. Lord, we thank you for the compassion sock drive they put on today. Father, as we leave your courts now to go to our several homes, we ask that you grant us traveling mercies. Be with us throughout the week, Lord, and help us that our lives would impact someone for you. Help us that we will be brave enough to tell someone that you're coming soon. And help us, Lord, that we will come back next week and give a report of what we have done for you. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Guys, I just want you to know that we have Brooklyn area t-shirts on sale sunset, right? I was going to say you could get them after sunset, but sunset, and they're $10. And thank you for a great day.
Quick announcement. A battery pack that was left on the front bench is missing. Anyone seeing a silver battery pack? Okay, the battery pack is found. We're asking all board members. Board meeting starts in 2 minutes. In the regular spot, 2 minutes. Thank you. Any other announcements? Have a blessed week, everybody.